thank you so much for coming. It's great to be able to see all of you and know why you're here to celebrate Tom and Frank. And it was my special privilege to get to work with both of them and spend a lot of time with both of them, but not as long as some of you did. And Marty Fatante is going to tell us a little bit too about his time with Tom and with Frank. But for me, I met Tom really, and he recruited me to run for office, and I was like, okay, I really wanted to, but I didn't know if I could do it. And he said, well, will you at least meet with this guy? Okay, I'll meet with this guy. So I called up Frank Egeler, and we set up a meeting, and I thought I was meeting somebody really smooth and fancy, and somebody who was going to be really high, top-notch. Couldn't believe, I got a tie on and everything, all dressed up for this meeting, and it was Frank Egeler. And I don't think I impressed him very much at first, but maybe not ever, really, knowing Frank. It's a fair point. But we had that first meeting, and Frank called me back and said, well, I think that you should meet with Tom and Diane. And then we had dinner with Tom and Diane and got into the race. And Frank was after me for months. You got to start knocking on doors. You got to start knocking on doors. Knock on doors. And so one day I finally got out there in March and started knocking on doors, and a couple of people spotted me, and next thing you know, I'm getting a call from Frank. What are you doing? I'm knocking on doors, just like you told me. Well, I didn't know you'd actually do it. And then all summer long, every time I'd be at the office, he's like, how come you're not out knocking on doors? And it was just push. Carla was there for most of that, she knows. And so Tom was always taking me in and willing to help me out and get me going, give me advice, always believed in me. And, friendships grew. And now I miss having both of them, especially in these times, because I could call Frank and say, hey, I've got this idea, like Bo does to me all the time, and bouncing off. Yeah, and Frank would be like, why do you want to do that? And he'd tell me like, and I'm like, well, do you think it's a bad idea? No, but I'm not sure you should do it. And there was always something with him, but I just miss having him and his advice, and certainly in these times could really use it. I think all of us could use it. But I won't belabor. I know you're not here to listen to me talk. Let's have Marty come up and say a few memories he has about Tom and Frank.
Thanks, Ed. It's nearly as difficult as it is heartbreaking to memorialize Tom and Frank together. And if you knew them both, you knew they were so different in so many ways. In fact, I often said with Tom growing up 7 doors down from Tom, that he was the big brother I always wanted. And with Frank renting from me, I frequently said he was the teenager I never wanted. Now, I know that sounds a bit harsh, especially in tribute to Frank, but let me just offer you one example of why that's true. So Frank wanted to do me the favor of cutting my lawn, and so appreciated that. But he didn't appreciate that there's a difference between a 2-cycle and a 4-cycle engine, so he proceeded to fill my 2-cycle lawnmower up with straight gas and blew the engine up. So to his credit, he wanted to get it fixed without letting me know, so I had a pickup truck at the home, so he threw it in the back of the pickup truck to bring it to get fixed. Of course, on the way, Frank decided to rear-end the brother of Escanaba's chief of police in my truck. Frank calls me from the scene to tell me what's happened, and I said, well, that truck's not insured, so good luck to you. So while an expensive memory for me, and hopefully a smile for you, the moral of the story is really one of the common traits about Tom and Frank and why I suspect so many of you are here today to honor them both. I say one of the common traits between the two is there were, despite the fact that they were so different, many common traits. Both loved Star Trek, which made long drives to the UP even longer. Both loved to laugh, both loved to tease, although Tom had a better sense of understanding boundaries. Both absolutely loved kids, especially Ashley, Tom, Hillary, and Dane, although Frank, it was really more in the moment. And of course, both loved politics and were inspired by, my eyesight's going on me, and inspired by the change that could be made through it. And both would certainly be humbled by you being here today to join in this celebration. And finally, both, as reflected in the story I started with, had a servant's heart. Although Tom had a better sense of knowing when trying to help was actually not helpful. Again, boundaries. So, for example, on one of our trips, I was driving, my wife was in the front seat, Tom was in the back seat, straight stretch of I-75. Trooper has a car pulled over about a mile ahead, so in my eyes, I have about a mile to slow down. As I pass the trooper, he signals for me to pull over. Don't quite understand it, only to learn that state troopers at that time had radar that detected to the rear. So Tom, always trying to be helpful, in his House of Representatives shirt at the time, decided to scooch over to the middle and start doing this shoulder thing to get the trooper's attention that he was a legislator. Apparently the logo was lost on the trooper, who only asked Tom, "Do you have a problem?" He said, "No, sir," and went back to his seat. But it was a much more profound roadside event that really reflects another critical and common trait between Frank and Tom. And that's what led Tom to run for office. And that's their faith. So, as I think many of you know, there was a fatal log truck accident that led Tom and some colleagues to devise a safer way to haul timber, what became known as the crib trailer. So, despite the fact that it didn't require any added payload, it only required 2 additional feet of length on the back of the trailer, the state wouldn't license it, with a bureaucrat at some point then telling Tom, if you don't like the law, go change it. And so with much reflection and prayer, Tom didn't just run on the challenge, but only did so with reflection and prayer with his wife and Diane, and ran for office. And so for Tom, running for office was truly an act of faith, believing that he was being called to do so. And his service, like his life, reflected his faith, always leading with kindness, humility, and grace. And while Frank didn't always lead with grace, he too had great faith. In fact, but for Frank's faith, I think one can fairly wonder if Tom would have ever been elected to office. And again, a number of you know this story, but the polls didn't look so good in 2002 for Tom as the election closed in. And so HRCC, Frank was field staff for Tom, thought that the handwriting was on the wall. They pulled him out of the race, and they dedicated him to a race, and I think it was in Alpena. But Frank knew in his heart, knew what he was seeing, and knew that Tom was in the race, despite what the polls said and despite what HRCC's outlook was. So Frank, every weekend, would leave, I think, Alpena, drive to the Upper Peninsula, chart out a path for the Casperson team that led to Tom being elected. And that was Frank's faith. So, although they expressed it differently, for both, faith was bigger than fear. So I think it's only appropriate to close with words from Matthew 25:23. Well done, good and faithful servants. Well done. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Connie.
Hello, buddy. First off, I just want to thank Senator McBroom and his staff for putting this all together. It's great that we can actually come together and celebrate Frank and Tom. So as I started thinking about stories to tell about Frank, a lot came to mind, like the first time I met him. I just started working in caucus services in the House in March of 2002, and I came over from the Senate. It was my first time in central staff. I was shoved back in no man's land, not a lot of people back there, and I shared a wall with the northern guy who wasn't around much. So a couple of weeks go by, and as I'm working, typing away, paper wads are flying over the cubicle wall, just one after the other. So as I'm fighting off this aerial assault, this head pops up over the wall and just has a big old smile on his face. And he's like, "Hey, I'm Frank. I'm the northern guy." And that is the first time that I met Frank, but not the last time he annoyed me by throwing things at me. I have a lot of first campaign stories with Frank. One of the first ones was we went up to West Branch to go do some doors on a Saturday, and it's a 2+ hour car ride with Frank. And, Frank either is talking or watching movies. And so he's telling me how he likes to run things. Okay, so we get up there and he's telling me the do's and don'ts, don't ever go in anybody's house, use the buddy system, and blah, blah, blah. So we start doing doors. What he didn't warn me about was what to do when somebody answered the door, not fully dressed, with a gun they're cleaning. So I didn't break eye contact, and I just handed the gentleman his lit, and I just screamed the candidate's name, and I ran away. Had to go find Frank, who was many doors down, so there goes his buddy system rule that he implied, but it was fine. It was fine. We survived. Another first was spending 4th of July up in the 108th in 2002. It was Tom's first race for the House, and Frank did nothing but talk about this Casperson family and how wonderful they were and how Tom was going to win this race. So I had a family reunion up there, and I told Frank, my new friend, that I'll help you out for a parade. And little did I know, Frank took that as, I have you for the entire day. So, all right, so we go. I meet up with them, and after meeting the family and all of their supporters and just feeling that energy, you knew there was something special. You knew there was something special about Tom, and Frank was spot on. You understood his enthusiasm. They had 3 trucks. One truck was filled with little kids wearing Casperson for State House shirts. And another truck had the supplies and the banners. Another truck pulled a flatbed that had a band playing on it. And then they had another 20-some volunteers walking the parade for them. And it was amazing. I've never seen anything like it. So we ended the parade, and the house that we ended at, I don't know, had 30, 40 Casperson signs in the yard. And that was Frank's little trick. He liked to mess with his opponents' minds. And the family, Frank and I, all jumped in a motorhome and went on to the next parade. And it had the same enthusiasm, the same volunteers and everything. And then we did another parade, and I think we did another parade, and we ended at a festival that day. So as I was ready to just collapse from exhaustion, Frank is still out there working the festival. He's shaking hands, talking about his friend Tom, introducing Tom to everybody. And that's really what I remember most about Frank, was he was never too shy to go up to a stranger and start a conversation. And I also really appreciated his drive, and as Marty said, his inability to follow orders from his bosses, and I'm so happy that he did continue to go up to the 108th so we could have them in our lives as well. But till then, thank you again for doing this, and You can have it.
Thanks, Connie, and thanks, Marty. At this time, in case some of you don't know, I want to introduce Diane. I don't know where she's gone. There she is. Diane Casperson, Tom's wife. And then their children, I see Hillary, and there's Dane, there's Tom and Ashley, and with their families. Thank you so much for making the time to come down here today for this. We have a tribute for Tom, for Frank. We have Tom's memorial at the Senate in a little bit. Most of you know if you want to come over to the Senate for 10 o'clock. But for Frank, let it be known that we extend our sympathies and respect to the family and many friends of Frank Egeler, most recently of Gwyn. Frank was born in Bangor, Maine, on December 28, 1963, to Fred and Barbara Francis Egeler. After relocating often due to his military service, Frank ultimately settled in Traverse City, where he enrolled in Traverse City area Catholic schools, became active in many activities such as Model United Nations, theater, student council, and the radio. Following high school graduation in '82, Frank spent a year on the road with Young Americans as a light and sound operator before returning to Traverse City, where he studied at Northwestern Michigan College. Following college, Frank held numerous jobs, but in 1998, he found his passion working on his first political campaign. He helped Jason Allen get elected to the Michigan House of Representatives. And I know Suzanne is here. I saw Suzanne. And Suzanne and Jason were just such huge figures. Frank talked about them all the time in my first race when he was helping me. This included Frank actively became involved in changing the landscape of the electorate in Michigan, especially northern Michigan. This included directing campaign strategy that led to Tom's establishment's surprising election to the State House. Frank's infectious enthusiasm, gentle spirit, passion, and persistence were the ingredients that allowed him to help many others realize their dreams of public service. Frank continued to serve as a director for the 38th Senate District until his passing. While Frank did shine in the political world, he was also intensely private and preferred to let the shadow of success of those he helped elect veil the significance of his contribution. In fact, Frank's character was defined by differing ends. On one hand, Frank was fun-loving and playful, and he loved to laugh, which led to him quickly making friends and easily relate to children. On the other hand, he was serious and thoughtful and commanded respect and attention of candidates and elected officials in northern Michigan. And he had his famous quote, "If it's below Claire, I don't care." No matter the imposition, Frank's character would see him give himself to help a friend or colleague. Frank's personality was skilled at managing the complexity of campaigns, which also led him to be a natural mentor for many political staffers. Beyond politics, Frank loved movies, music, and a good debate, often playing the contrarian. He loved to camp and reminiscing and laughing around campfires, and loved biking, especially across the Upper Peninsula. In special tribute, therefore, this is signed and dedicated to express our condolences to Frank Egeler's family and many friends. May they know of the respect and affection that is held for him, his work, and his legacy. Did anyone from the Casperson family care to say something? I would just pick Ashley usually because they usually pick her, but maybe she's grown shy and wants somebody else to talk.
Thank you, everybody. I think there aren't really words to say that can articulate how grateful we are for all of you. It's been so wonderful to be down here and see so many familiar faces and people we've seen along the way in campaigns or working down here or weeks down here with my dad. I remember coming down. I think we've all had the pleasure of doing that and spending time on the floor and all the wonderful memories. So a heartfelt thank you. And I know on behalf of my mom, she's so grateful for all your love and support as we've navigated this. Please stay in touch. We love hearing from you. We love hearing about stories about my dad, and we're so grateful.
Thanks, Ashley. One last story about Frank. I learned this at his funeral from some of his family, that Frank loved movies so much that he had a huge collection. And you remember how movies were in the 80s and 90s. They were on VHS cassettes. So they're much heavier. And so Frank had I don't remember if it was his sister's husband, but somebody in his family was a carpenter. And Frank had this place, and he decided he wanted a bed that would fold up into the wall and have shelves underneath it. So it would fold up into the bookcase. And then he was going to put all of his movies on that shelf. And then have the bed go up, and there'd be his shelf of his movies. And so this brother-in-law helped him build this, and they designed it, and then they put all the movies on there. And it was too heavy. You couldn't pick it up to, to close it up. So now I have one last surprise, and it might seem a little out of place at first, but you know, Tom and Marty and Frank made family, I think. And I think, you know, the Casperson family recognizes how much Frank loved being part of their family, and how much Marty was part of that family, and how much we all were brought together around Tom. And when Tom left the Senate and Marty left the Senate with him, you know, I'd hoped he was going to come and work for me, but he found greener pastures. And so a tribute wasn't done for Marty. And Representative Lefebvre thought of this week and said, we never did anything for Marty. And I know he's going to hate this, and he's mad at me already. But you're never going to get him to come down here and be in a room to get a tribute, because he's too humble for that. And so I've also got a tribute here for Marty Fatante. Let it be known that it's with deep appreciation for the exceptional work, extraordinary dedication, and valued friendship that Marty Fatante has offered to those with whom he has worked in Lansing, and for the people of the Upper Peninsula through his employment with Senator Casperson, and most recently as CEO of InvestUP, that we offer this tribute as an expression of our heartfelt thanks, along with the members and former co-workers in Michigan's legislature, and with the communities of the UP that he helped and now assists. We want to express our gratitude for Marty's unmatched service and care for the people of Michigan's beautiful Upper Peninsula. Marty grew up in Escanaba. After a great baseball career as a pitcher, he graduated from Escanaba High School in 1983. Marty attended Bay College and went on to Ferris State and then to Wayne State University Law School in Detroit. He traveled back to Escanaba and began his career as a lawyer. In 2001, Marty defended a log truck driver who was involved in a highway accident where tragically a mother and daughter were killed. Marty, with the blessing of both the affected family and the log trucking industry in the UP, went up against an overly aggressive prosecutor and won what was later called the UP's trial of the century. This log trucking accident and the subsequent trial became the catalyst for Tom Casperson entering politics. Marty assisted Tom's State House campaign and ultimately became Tom's legislative director in 2004. He served with Tom in the House until Tom was term limited out, and then he worked 2 years for the House Republican Policy Office until Tom ran and won the Senate seat for the 38th District in 2010. Marty became Tom's chief of staff and served all 8 years in Tom's Senate office. Marty's unparalleled work ethic, relationship skills, and ability to make people laugh, incredible heart for service, and generosity are just a few of the many reasons that made him a truly remarkable and special legislative staff member. This was exemplified when he was named the inaugural recipient of the John Farley Michigan Legislative Staff Award. His work in the Senate District, plus the many hours spent in Lansing after trips back and forth to the district, exemplify his extraordinary commitment to the UP. His travels with Tom produced some of the greatest stories and laughs. Those close to them still fondly remember the nicknames of Tiger or the Italian Stallion, as Tom called him often from behind the wheel. And Marty called him Sparky back. While Marty was Tom's dedicated staff, their friendship went back much further. They met and became friends in the late 70s. In Tom's farewell speech to the Senate in December of 2018 tells the tale of their extraordinary friendship, where Tom said, thanks to my work wife, Marty, because Marty and I, for those who don't know, go back quite a ways. Marty was a little runt, and he was a little at one time when I first met him. If you can imagine, I was in high school, and I saw this beautiful young girl, and I wanted to date her. You ask her out, and she actually says yes. So then you start dating her, and her father, a good man, suggests when you take out his daughter, you also take this little kid out, too. And that was Marty. I had him in the back seat in tow on occasions with dates, and his dad, for some reason, thought this was a good idea. I didn't see the logic in that at all. But that started a friendship that's hard to beat. I grew up with 2 sisters, never had a brother. If I had a brother, it would be Marty. Loyal, defends me to the death. I don't know why he does, but we've been together from the beginning. I mentioned Frank Egeler earlier, and he came on quickly into the house and then left. He knew that wasn't his gig. But Marty came on and has been with me ever since, and I think we make a heck of a team, and I'll be forever grateful for that. Marty's reputation for loyalty and devotion was never more strongly verified than through the last few years with the losses that included his own father, Frank Egeler, and Tom Casperson. Marty remained ever helpful, loyal, loving, steadfast, faithful, and faith-filled for them, and continues to be of assistance to their family and friends. Therefore, we dedicate this to Marty Fitante. Marty? Thanks, Marty. I won't make you talk again. I hope you'll be able to come over to the Senate for Tom's memorial. Thanks so much for being here, and enjoy the company and the food.